The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the QATV staff or board of directors. QATV, in compliance with FCC regulations, is prohibited from exercising control over the content of independent, member-produced public access programming.
Hi there, welcome to the show. Soph and me thought we will bring in, as usual, some informative, educational shows to you as we've been doing all along. And today we have a very special guest, Janet Ferrone. She has been with the Boston Public School for the last 30 years, and she's going to shed some light on autism. I am sure autism has touched most of us in some way or the other. And welcome, Janet.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here speaking with you, especially on this topic, since it's really an area that has become very personal for me, very passionate about the cause. I've been, as you said, working in the Boston Public Schools for 30 years, not with autistic students until several years ago. And I've just learned so much, and I've been really furthering my education around this. So as you said, I think a lot of people have heard of autism lately. I think with Rain Man in the movies kind of started it, and then there's been a lot of news articles, some good, some bad, but I think people have a curiosity about this. I know I did, because it's not a disability that is very well known and very predictable. So the program that I'm involved in is a Boston Public High School. I'm one of the administrators there, and I'm running two programs, one for students with depression and anxiety, and then a separate program for students with autism. And they range from probably age 14 to 22. Not sure if you're aware, but in Massachusetts, if you have special needs, you're in school eligible until 22. So we have a wide range of students. They're very unique, even though it's a syndrome that has similar characteristics. A lot of it, the disability shows itself in different ways. But I wanted to just give you a little overview of what autism is. It's still a pretty new science. They've, over the years, changed the criteria, changed diagnoses, a lot of movement in the area. But basically, it's a bioneurological disability is how it's referred to, and it primarily affects communication systems. The thing that I was surprised to learn is that there's so many other disabilities and conditions that often accompany it: seizures, asthma, allergies, a lot of depression, anxiety, in that, particularly in the higher functioning groups where they're more aware of, that they're experiencing these issues. So that's in terms of the cause of it, it's really unknown. There's a lot of theories about maternal age at birth, medications that the parents might have taken, a lot of different ideas that have not been definitively proven. But one of the things that in the past, and I think you may have heard this, a lot of people think of it as, it's some sort of punishment. It's we were not good parents. A lot of times the mother is blamed for not being able to attach. And I know a lot of your listeners are from the South Asian community, and there's the whole concept of karma. So people having this feeling that you're being punished for some past deeds in prior life or in that lifetime. So there is a lot of times a stigma about this, that it's not quite right, and what did we do, which is really unnecessary. It's very much a neurological and biological syndrome, but Many cultures, Native Americans, also Latinos have a sort of, oh, it's almost in the witchcraft kind of area. So there's been a lot of stigma. In speaking about the South Asian community, the research, a lot of it is from Canada. We don't have much in the US, but there's talk about the secrecy of the diagnoses, that the families don't want to let even their siblings know that my child has a disorder. Husbands sometimes refuse to acknowledge. So there was a lot of work that I read in Canada where there were even families that wouldn't go to the functions, the weddings, the birthday parties, because they were hiding the child. If it was a female, they talked about the eligibility of the marriage. You don't want it known because then that reduces the chances. So there's a lot of cultural norms in the whole diagnosis of autism when students or when children are identified. Some families think, well, it'll go away. I don't want to call attention to it. In the US, it seems to be going the other way. There's really a medical model. Okay, that something is not right. My child must develop at certain milestones. Let me take them to the doctor. And fortunately, if students are identified early, the treatments, the interventions are much more successful than if students are diagnosed later in life. So we definitely see that.
When do they know that there's something wrong with the child? When is it shown that when do you know that my child has autism? When they cannot speak or when they cannot understand? How is it diagnosed?
Well, normally it's diagnosed by the age of 3 is the time when most parents, and you have that mother's intuition, you know that something is just not quite right. It could be speaking, it could be maybe the child is speaking but no eye contact, inappropriate language, it's not relating to what the words are, what the question is, or very non-emotional. Normally your child comes to you, there's affection and hugging. Right. There may be children who are just blank. So there's a lot of different clues, and like I said, the mother usually knows, and sometimes they'll go to the doctor and the doctor will say, oh, not everybody talks at the same rate, not everyone, is at the same rate, but the mom is saying, no, listen to me, I know something is wrong. And I think the families that give that push, because in some cultures the doctor is God. If the doctor says that, and I know Asian communities, can be in that. So I think it's very different how children get diagnosed. There's no blood test or urine sample for, other things. You have diabetes, well, there's your sugar count. So this is really symptoms and very involved with the social
life.
Yes.
It's got a wide spectrum. I think autism has a wide spectrum.
Yes, and it's good you brought that up. Recently, as recent as 2013, the whole diagnostic criteria changed. Have you heard of Asperger's syndrome?
Yes.
That's usually referred to the more higher functioning, higher intelligence. They've no longer used that. That's been taken out of the manual. They have a DSM manual to identify different disorders. Right now it is, as you said, one large spectrum. It normally had been broken down. So now it's on they call it ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder. But you could be from a very low intelligence level here to extremely high. And it is very awkward sometimes for people to say, well, I have autism, and then they're so high functioning, and then they look and see someone who's nonverbal, unable to really learn a lot, and it seems, like I said, awkward to be in that same category. So there's a lot of controversy around that type of use of the diagnosis.
So in your 30 years with the Boston Public School System, what is your mission? Like, you have worked with autistic children, and I know you have a passion towards that, but what are you looking forward in your life to do with autism?
Well, right now, as I said, I'm the administrator of the program, so I'm really looking to enrich the lives of these students. Many of them are inner city students. They don't have the resources that we would have if we had a child that needed extra support. We'd be driving to the therapist, we'd be buying organic food, we'd be trying supplements, all the things that might be helpful. The students I deal with, many of them in Boston, 78% of the students are at the poverty level. They're free or reduced lunch. So a lot of these students are in homes that are not able to provide that extra support. One of the things that I've really been excited about is bringing the arts and music in. Students who can't communicate verbally can communicate, can express themselves through texture and color and music. And this is the area that I think, I'm so excited about. Just in this 1 year, we have someone who's teaching art, and it's phenomenal. He's integrating the lessons, vocabulary development, so they're learning words for teal. They learned teal. They were very excited because normally it's red, blue, yellow, primary colors. They mix their own colors. They made a beautiful mural, which I had
Yes.
shown you, from Frozen, Queen Elsa. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but Disney has such an attraction for students with autism. They
Amazing.
love Disney. There's even a story a few years ago of a family that the child just watched the videos over and over and over. And the family used that to communicate. They spoke in the voice of Aladdin. They spoke in the different voices, and the child responded with language. So I'm really surprised when, we have adolescent males who normally have outgrown, but Queen Elsa was very important to them. And the mural is in squares. So each group, it was traced on, each group was able to work at a table and do their square. Because for students with autism, the large scope, they have little sensory overload. So if something is too large, too complicated, they will shut down. But it was each in the squares, and it's a professionally beautiful mural. So I was very proud of that. We've also had music. I met someone at a party, and he said, what do you do? And I told him, he said, I've done some music with autistic students. Within the next couple of weeks, we were fundraising, trying to get him in, and he came in and did West African drumming with the students.
Lovely.
And the rhythm, the way their bodies got into it, with the first minute, they just put the instruments in front, he did a few things, and they just followed along. We also have a student who is very much musical, and he's a bit higher functioning. He's performed at some of my galas that I do for fundraising. He does the background, the jazz music. He's been to a Berkeley summer program for city youth. So there is a lot in that area, and you've probably heard of musical savants where they may not be able to speak or do many other things, but the music. There was also, it was one of those videos that goes viral of a young man in England who would look at buildings and memorize them, go home, draw them to the T. If the window pane had 14 window panes, it was drawn. And they took him in a helicopter over London for 15 minutes. And then they brought him and they set up like a room this size of paper. He recreated the London skyline, detail by detail, the little balusters, the cornices, to the T. It's just amazing if you see this.
So basically they can focus on just what they want to focus. Their brains can focus that, and it's amazing.
It is, and obviously it causes great distress in terms of learning and communicating, but just if you can focus in on that one piece, he's an artist that I would never be able to approximate anything near that. Also, there's something new, which is on a positive note. There's companies seeking autistic individuals in the software and tech industry because their attention to detail is so high that they could have the job of making sure there's no glitches, making sure everything is perfect, and they're not at the water cooler socializing. They're not, distracted by any of that. They have a focus. We had a student who, his mom said, make sure you finish your lunch every day. And we had a fire drill. And we said, okay, you have to go. And he said, no, my mom said I must finish my lunch every day. And we had a difficult time, getting him, had to make promises, we'll hold the lunch, you can finish it. But it's that
Lovely.
singular focus that
Gets
can-
them to be successful.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. So, till 22, Massachusetts supports autistic children. What happens after that?
Excellent question. We do have a range of services within Massachusetts, and as you probably know, Massachusetts is a state that has more services than some of the other states. So there's an organization called DDS, Department of Developmental Services, and what we do is we have a transition coordinator who works directly with our school. And when the students are approaching, usually 2 years before they're going to leave, we set up the connections, we get them eligible, it's, mass paperwork and all that. But there's different agencies that will support the students with employment, with day programs, sometimes with housing. A lot of our students may not be able to live at home. Things like that. We also have Mass Rehab Commission in Massachusetts. You're probably familiar with that, and they help with the work. We also do a lot within our school with the older students to get them ready for employment. We do internships with the YMCA, the Boston Public Library, the Hyde Park branch. They set up for the Children's Story Hour and clean up and help the children. So they're really, a lot of them are very good, particularly with younger children. I think they feel less threatened than maybe a same age peer.
Obviously.
Yeah.
So what happens is when these children go home, does the state support them in any way? Because in the school, I understand it's well educated, you have well resourced. What happens when they go home?
It's a very mixed bag, so to speak. A lot of our students, which is in general for some city students, a lot of them being raised by grandparents who don't really have the capability to sustain the level of energy that is needed for dealing with a child of so much disability. The DDS that I mentioned, they do provide services to the home. There's after-school programming. Some of our students go straight from our school to a local after school that specializes in autism, and then the bus brings them home maybe 5:30 in the evening, so they have the day break. But we do have one of the services, you may have heard of ABA, so the behavioral therapists can go in the home, and that's really recommended at a young age to have the behavioral therapy. But it's interesting, students who are doing very well in school, we're getting calls from the parents that they're out of control, they're aggressive, there's a lot of damage to the home. But in school, it's so structured. From the minute they walk in, it's always, this is the expectation, this is what will happen, these are the people that will be there. At the certain time, you'll be brought to the classroom. Most of the time, they have what's called a do now, an activity to settle them in. Everything, there's visuals, here's your schedule, the first period you're doing this, the second period you have gym or you have art. So much that keeps them within
The structure.
the structure. And, home is many more hours, and it just doesn't lend itself. I mean, the families that do, we've worked with them to have a behavior chart that they can carry over. But it is very difficult. And then school vacations, you have a whole week, 24/7. And then if the students aren't able to communicate, it often does lead to aggressive behaviors. We've had multiple caregivers that have been assaulted by the child. And some of them are 17, 18, 19-year-old males that are rather
Right.
large, yeah.
Yes.
So they're like that structured. I guess that's how they can function.
That's how they can function, because their minds aren't, we all have a level of self-regulation.
Right.
I needed to come here to the studio. I had work, I needed to go home first. You know, you figure that out. That processing is really not there, so it's very overwhelming. They don't know what's going to happen next. They feel very unsafe.
So everybody has a different like severity of autism. Like some they can still function, and some cannot do that either. Like how do you do that? Like how do you differentiate with that? And like are they on medication when it's like that?
Some of the students are on medication for different disorders. For example, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is very prevalent with autistic students. So some of them might be medicated for that. There's really no autism medication, but they're on medication, some for seizures, some for anxiety. We have a lot of examples now coming up of the OCD, the obsessive compulsive disorder.
Right.
We have one student, just getting him in the classroom, he has to take 3 steps and back up 3 steps, you know, and you have to say 1, 2, 3 in, and you know, go through a little ritual with him. There's a lot of rituals.
That's why it's the wide spectrum that Janet mentioned
Right.
earlier. So it comes with allergy, it comes OCD, all of this fall under. So you don't have a specific medication for autism,
Right.
which I understand.
But I think a lot of people are diagnosed with ADHD like all the time. Like sometimes people say it's too much. Like you know, like anything, you know, you just give it a name.
That is the U.S. model, I think, where it's the medical model, and if you are deviating from the norm, well, let's fix it with some medicine. And you see a lot of parents who, it's very interesting because there's some parents who are very much in favor of medication. A lot of the city parents are not. There's been much more of a history of drug abuse and negative impacts, and they don't want the drugs. A lot of the suburban parents are like, what can you give him? What will make him focus? Make him do this, make him do that. So we see a range.
It's kind of education, because if you see US model maybe that towards medication, but it's also the model that has understood or has pinpointed what autism is, or what other what are the medications. On the other hand, the city, like you mentioned, those parents have drug abuse and all of that. So education has a lot to do with it. So they think that if they take too much of this, maybe they'll get into drugs and all that.
Exactly, yeah.
So, but whereas the parents, suburban parents, says, we know that this is an allergy, we need to cure them. So that's when or someone's to hide. No, he's a normal child, or she's a normal child. So sometimes you can blame medication, which most of the people do, but in reality, this is the reason US is so good in research or finding out what is going on with all these diseases. Now you can overuse them or underuse them or not use them. That's, I think, up to the parent or the child.
But I think it's really helpful, like the Boston city does that. Like they, you know, they acknowledge that there is a problem, and they try to at least help the kids, because in some countries that's not available.
Exactly.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
You
Most
know,
countries it's not
like
available.
Americans.
Even in, I think Janet would be able to shed some light. Even in US, I think there are very few states that support the child till 22. I think 18 is the norm.
It varies, but Massachusetts definitely is known as an education state.
Absolutely.
I
so-
think in Illinois too, because I
Maine.
know that
more
they
the
have
northern states,
states.
and then the southern states a little less, and they're lower on the totem pole of ratings for
Absolutely right.
education. Yeah.
Yes.
But what can parents do, like, to help it out? Because some parents, like, really, you know, like, they don't, oh no, I can't do this because my child is, I have to be there for the child. What can they do? Because sometimes they get really bogged down, you know, because they have to be constant watching them and constant, you know, in control of them. What can they do? Like,
Well, again, Massachusetts has a lot of support services. There's family therapy, there's family workers, there's even respite care where a child, in Dedham, there's a place where if the parent needs to go away for a weekend or just needs some respite time, like I said, the after-school programming. And I think, you know, getting a support network, there are support groups, working with the pediatrician, and being really advocating, because funding is tight all over. If you go in and you're meek and mild and say, well, maybe it'll get better, then they say, okay, have a nice day. But if you say, no, my child was speaking this many words, now I don't hear it, they need more speech and language therapy, I need more assistance. It's, really the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You have to speak up and take care of yourself. That's a major thing where, using the analogy on the airplane, before you help your child, you put your oxygen on. And if you don't have a good self-care, parental stress, the studies show the parental stress of this type of disability, more so than learning disability, mental retardation, all the other disabilities. A parent of a child with autism has the highest stress. And I think they equate it to the air traffic controller on that same level.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's talk where the students are not able to really bond emotionally, and that's really hard. At least if you see a child with Down syndrome, they're usually smiling, they're coming and hugging, so that is missing. Yeah. But to point out, right now in the U.S., we're diagnosing 1 out of every 68 children. 4 times as many boys than girls. And I know you also focus on women, and it's definitely an interest of mine. We're looking at how is it diagnosed, what's the differences. And it's interesting that sexism seems to play a part, because there's a stereotype, the little quiet, shy girl with her head down, oh, she's just a little shy girl, isn't that cute? And they overlook that maybe there is something more to it. Whereas with the boy, what do you mean he's not doing this? He's not, out there in the world. So even though it does seem like there are more boys with a disorder, it seems like the diagnosis. Also, some of the repetitive nature, some of the things the girls are focused on seem a little more appropriate. Makeup or dolls, whereas if we have one young man who loves purses, particularly Coach purses, and if you walk into the building and he'll see you, oh, you have a wristlet, that right away people are saying, what is that boy doing talking about purses? Something is wrong. Whereas with the girls, it's shown that their symptoms are a little different, and also shown that girls help other girls with autism. They recognize that they're not following the social norms, and they'll say, oh no, you don't do that. When someone says this, you say thank you. Whereas the boys just seem to ignore the child with autism. So there's a lot of differences within the genders.
So interesting. It's just, I think not only Janet did you shed light and educate me, but and Sophie, I think you've educated all our audience. And it was a pleasure having you. And thank you once again.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And hope to hear some more on autism and your mission. It's such a passionate job. And the patience you need.
Well, when you see how little these students have and how much they need, our children, they're making their way through the world, but these students do not have that same level. So it's really where my calling is, to give to the students that don't have the resources.
That's so nice. On that call, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. I'm Isha.
And I'm Soph. Thank you, Jen.